So when I was 15 years old, I had this moped, and this moped was a piece of junk. Its tires were bald, its lights didn't work. Just to get it started, I had to run alongside it, and I had to kickstart it just to get it started. I never got it registered, probably because it wouldn't pass the test, but I didn't get a license plate for it either. So one day I'm riding it, and a policeman pulls me over, and he gives me a ticket for all the things that were broken, and he gives me a ticket on top of that for not having it registered, for basically driving an unregistered vehicle. So the poor moped, it broke. It just died. And so what I did is I never took care of the tickets. And about a year later, when I was 16 years old, I wanted to get my license, my real license. I didn't even have a license when I was driving this thing before. And so I had this police officer friend of mine. I asked him to look up my record. And he looked it up and he said, "Oh, man, I should arrest you right now. You got a warrant out for your arrest, my friend." And I'm like, "Oh, man, no, that's not good." So I realized I had to go take care of it. So I went to court. I went in front of a judge, and I pleaded guilty to everything because I was guilty. And the judge could have sentenced me to juvenile jail if he wanted to, but he had mercy on me, and he just gave me a $1,000 fine, which I thought was great, rather than the alternative of going to jail. And what I want you guys to picture tonight is that the Bible paints the same picture. He paints this picture of God being our judge. And so it's like we're charged with violating God's law in this heavenly court. See, the problem, though, is that we're all guilty. We're definitely guilty in front of God. The judge of the universe is ready to take his gavel and slam it down. He's ready to pronounce us guilty, and he's actually ready to send us to hell for the guilt that we have. And so the thing is that God is perfectly right and perfectly just to do that as well. And so what makes us guilty before God? Our sin. Our sin makes us guilty before God. God as a judge cannot just look the other way. He can't just ignore our sin completely. His laws have to be upheld. You see, our first point is that our sin makes us guilty as charged. 1 John 3:4 says, "Everyone who sins is breaking God's law, for all sin is contrary to the law of God." See, the problem is that everyone sins. We all break God's law, and that means that we're breaking God's law all the time, every day. You see, you can think of some of the 10 Commandments as an example. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't want what others have, don't cheat on your husband or your wife, honor your parents, don't put anything else above God. Those are just some of the 10 Commandments, but Jesus summed up all 10 with two statements. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. So, if in everything that we do, and everything that we think, and everything that we say, if we don't reflect love and honor for God in all those things, we're guilty of breaking God's law. And in the same way, in everything that you do, and everything that you think, and everything you say, if you're not putting others first, you're also breaking God's law. Jesus pointed out that God's law doesn't just cover our actions, but it also covers our thoughts, our motives, our attitudes, everything else, even if it's not the actual action itself. Back in the Old Testament, it says, don't murder. Well, Jesus comes along and he says, hey, even if you're angry with somebody, it's just as bad as killing them. The Old Testament says, don't sleep with someone that you're not married to. Well, Jesus comes along and says, hey, even if you have lust for someone else, it's just the same thing as actually sleeping with that person. And so this is where God's law sets this higher standard for us than our own laws. It's not against the law to cheat on your husband or cheat on your wife, but our courts don't judge our inner thoughts. They don't judge our inner attitudes. They don't judge our motives, but God does. See, breaking God's law may not make us criminals in our own law here, but it makes us guilty in the eyes of God. See, Romans 3, verse 19 through 20 says this, obviously, the law applies to those to whom it was given, for its purpose is to keep people from having excuses and to show that the entire world is guilty before God. For no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. See, God's law is not given as this way for us to climb to God if we keep all of the laws. It's not a checklist to say, yep, I kept that law, I kept that law, I kept that law, now I can go to heaven. That's not what the Old Testament law was for. The law actually shows us how sinful we are. Basically, we can all just look at all the 10 Commandments and all the laws in the Bible and say, yep, I messed that one up. Yep, I didn't keep that one. Yeah, I did that one. And it's this checklist to say, I'm a sinner. There's sin in my life. See, you've got this criminal record before God. You got this big, long record. It probably takes up a ton of file cabinets in one big room. But so do I. We all have this criminal record to God. It's like we've been arrested and we're awaiting trial. And when we die, God is sitting in his heavenly courtroom ready to just drop the sentence on us, ready to drop the boom, ready to drop the gavel and send us all to hell. What hope do we have of escaping this conviction before God, this judgment? This does. Jesus was convicted in our place on the cross. Imagine you standing in court, you're staring up at the judge, he's about ready to sentence you to the worst judgment ever, you're terrified, you're scared, and then Jesus steps in. And Jesus says, wait, I'll take the punishment. I'll take it all. I'll do the time in his place. Even though this person deserves what they're going to get, I'll take it. But then God comes and says, do you realize that punishment for that person deserves death? And Jesus says, yes, I do. And I love this person so much, I'm willing to die for this person. I'm willing to give up my life in their place. Romans 5 says, when we're utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for sinners. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. So this whole scenario of Jesus taking the place for our sin, it's only possible because Jesus never sinned. Hebrews 4:15 says he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. Jesus never broke God's law, not in anything that he did, not in any attitude or motive, not even in his thoughts. He never ever sinned. He never broke God's law. He never did any of those things that we do every day. Therefore, Jesus has no judgment on him. There's no ruling against him. His record is completely spotless. If it wasn't, he can only take his own punishment, not ours. But because he never sinned, he's able to take our punishment as well. Therefore, what this means is that we can live in righteousness. First, what that means is that we have a clean record in God's sight because of Jesus. Literally, our sin was placed on Jesus that makes our record clean. And amazing as that is, there's so much more. God actually begins a work in us. When we accept Jesus, he starts to change us. He starts to bring about a new kind of righteousness in our lives. He begins to transform our actions, the way that we think, the words that we use, our own motives, our own attitudes within us. He begins to shape and change those and make those so much better, so much cleaner, so much more godly. Romans 8, verse 1 and 2 says, so now there's no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. Having atoned for us, this big word that we've been using in this series, having atoned for us, having died for us and made a relationship with God possible, God starts a rebuilding process in us. He puts a life-giving Spirit within us. He begins to change us from the inside out so that we don't have to give in to the power of sin like we used to before we knew Jesus. We now have this capacity to live in a new way, to have a new life that actually honors God. You see, even though this judge had mercy on me for this moped thing and he gave me a $1,000 fine, I still couldn't pay that. But my dad did. He paid it for me. And you know what? After that, I became the best son in the world. I kept my room clean. I didn't fight with my sisters as much. I took out the trash. I did all my chores. I did all those different things, not because I felt guilty that he did this for me, not because I was ever going to be able to pay that money back at my age, but because I did that, all because I was so thankful that he kept me out of jail, that he paid that for me. Out of my thankfulness, I became a great son. Now, Jesus did that for you too. He paid your fine. He took your punishment. So now with your new heart and your new attitude, you should have this motivation. It should be motivation enough to live a life in thankfulness to him. That's my challenge to you tonight. Accept the fact that Jesus took your punishment and now live a life that honors God just out of this pure heart of thankfulness to say, God, thank you. Jesus, thank you for what you've done for me. I'm going to live my life for you.